Ladies and gentlemen, there are questions which, though uttered with a smile, carry the weight of 1,000 years of misunderstanding. These are not inquiries. They are intrusions. Not all questions seek truth. Some seek control, affirmation, or escape, and so let us begin. What's wrong with you today? This question assumes brokenness, where there may only be silence. It fails to see that her storms are sacred, that her moods, her quiet, her discontent may be the chrysalis before transformation. She is not malfunctioning. She is becoming. Why do you care so much? Because she feels the world through skin and soul. This question diminishes depth, as if passion were pathology. To care deeply is not madness. It is a mirror of the world's unmet longing. Are you on your period? A question not of curiosity, but of dismissal. As though biology could explain away brilliance or rebellion. Her fire does not wait for a cycle. It is the cycle. Why can't you just let it go? Because some things root in the bones. She remembers not only her wounds, but those of generations. The feminine does not forget. She integrates. Isn't that a bit dramatic? Only to those who have forgotten how to feel. What you call drama, she calls life in full color. Emotion is not excess, it is essence. Shouldn't you be over that by now? Healing is not linear. She carries inner temples where grief still sings. Time may pass, but the soul moves in spirals, not clocks. When are you going to settle down? As if her story must end in domestic stillness, as if her value lies in being claimed. But the woman who knows herself may never settle. She may only expand. Don't you think you're being a little too much? This is the oldest fear, that her power is threatening. But let me tell you, she was never made to be small. She is not too much. The room is simply too narrow. Who do you think you are? Now this is the question that truly drives her mad. Not because she doesn't know, but because she does. And the world isn't ready to hear the answer. And finally, can't you just be happy? The demand for passive joy. But she seeks more than happiness. She seeks wholeness. And sometimes that means walking through the fire, not smiling through the silence. These questions don't merely irritate. They wound, because they fail to see the divine architecture of the woman's psyche. She is not a puzzle to be solved, nor a riddle to be simplified. She is myth and marrow, chaos and calm, womb and word. So let us not ask questions to control her. Let us ask to know her. Let us dare to hold space for the wild, for the wise, for the woman who has remembered that she is more than the world ever told her she could be. To understand why certain questions drive a woman to the edge of irritation, confusion, or even emotional distress, one must begin not at the surface but at the level of the soul, where archetypes live, and where personality meets the unconscious. A woman is not a collection of habits, moods, or opinions. She is an ever-unfolding psychic terrain, vast, symbolic, and paradoxical. Those who seek to understand her through logic alone will always be met with contradiction, not because she is evasive, but because she is complex by design. Within the feminine psyche live archetypes older than civilization itself. The mother, the maiden, the sage, the mystic, the warrior, the healer, the witch. These are not mere roles. They are inner blueprints, deeply etched into her consciousness. Each of these archetypes carries its own instinctual drives, desires, fears, and wisdoms. At any moment, one may rise to the surface while another retreats. A woman may be fierce in the morning, nurturing by noon, and detached by evening, not because she is inconsistent, but because she contains multitudes. When she is asked, for example, why are you so emotional? The question strikes not at her behavior, but at the legitimacy of the mystic or the oracle within her, the part of her that feels deeply, that channels unseen energies, that intuits truths beyond the rational. To reduce this to hormonal fluctuation is to exile a sacred part of her being. It's not merely insulting, it's dismembering. Or take the seemingly innocuous question, when will you settle down? At the surface, it sounds like curiosity about her life plans, but beneath it lies an assumption that the wanderer, the wild woman, the part of her that resists confinement, should surrender to domestication. And if she doesn't, she must justify her divergence from the expected path. And the question drags her into a symbolic courtroom where she must defend her right to be who she is. These questions drive her crazy, not because they are inherently cruel, but because they often fail to honor the sacred tension she holds within. She is not just living one life, she is balancing many inner voices. When the outside world speaks to her in terms that are flat, binary, or reductive. It jars her from her psychic reality, a reality where everything is in motion, where meaning is layered, where contradiction is not failure, but a sign of depth. Furthermore, these questions often demand premature clarity. What do you want? Why are you acting like this? Who do you think you are? These are not simple inquiries. These are initiatory riddles. They belong not in casual conversation, but in the sacred spaces of dream work, therapy, solitude, or ritual. When posed flippantly, they do violence to her interior world. They rush a process that is meant to unfold slowly, like the blooming of a flower in the dark. Many women live under the weight of this constant interrogation. And it is exhausting, not because they lack answers, but because they are forced to interpret questions not designed to see them. Questions shaped by a culture that venerates certainty, efficiency, and control, rather than mystery, receptivity, and process. To be asked to explain herself in a language that does not mirror her truth is to feel psychologically exiled in plain sight. What drives a woman crazy is not the question itself, but the assumption behind it that she should be easily understood, readily explained, quickly defined. Yet her psyche is lunar, not solar. It waxes and wanes. It withdraws and emerges. It is not an object to be studied, but a presence to be encountered. When the wrong questions are asked, they don't just annoy, they disorient. Because they force her into a role she has not chosen, and into an identity that denies the rich multiplicity within. The psyche does not merely observe the world, it casts shadows upon it. What we do not consciously understand in ourselves, we unconsciously project onto others. In this way, many of the questions that drive a woman crazy are not truly about her at all. They are expressions of someone else's inner conflict, masked as curiosity or concern. They are projections in disguise, seeking affirmation, containment, or clarity where none is owed. When a man, or even society at large, asks a woman, "Why can't you just be more logical?" it is not truly a question about logic. It is a projection of the masculine need for order, rationality, and predictability onto the feminine, which often moves through the world with intuition, feeling, and fluidity. This kind of questioning reveals more about the discomfort of the asker than about the nature of the woman herself. The woman becomes a screen onto which inner chaos, fear of the unknown, or unresolved dependency is cast. The feminine, psychologically speaking, is not the opposite of reason, but its complement. She holds space for mystery, for ambiguity, for what cannot be measured or solved. To misunderstand this is to split the psyche, to pit logos against eros, clarity against complexity. When someone asks, "Why are you making this such a big deal?" they are rarely listening to her actual experience. Instead, they are projecting their own fear of emotional depth, their resistance to vulnerability, or their need to avoid confrontation. Such projections are subtle but powerful. They reduce a woman's complexity to a caricature. If she asserts herself, she is too intense. If she withdraws, she is cold. If she cries, she is manipulative. If she questions, she is difficult. These labels are not observations. They are projections of psychic discomfort. And when they come in the form of questions, they force a woman into an impossible position, to defend herself against an illusion she did not create. Even well-meaning questions can carry this shadow. Consider, don't you think you're overreacting? The speaker may genuinely believe they are offering perspective, but beneath the surface lies an attempt to neutralize what they do not want to feel. The woman's emotional truth, when it cannot be easily categorized or rationalized, is made suspect. Her depth becomes a threat, and the question becomes a subtle attempt to reassert control over the uncontrollable. At the root of this dynamic is a fundamental misunderstanding of the feminine as chaotic, and therefore needing containment. But chaos in the mythological sense is not disorder. It is creative potential before form. The woman is often forced to carry this projected chaos, to hold not only her own inner tensions, but the unclaimed shadows of those around her. She becomes the emotional scapegoat, the mirror, the oracle, interpreted only in relation to what others refuse to see in themselves. This kind of misunderstanding runs deep. A question like, "Why are you so sensitive?" may seem minor on the surface, but it carries a centuries-old legacy of emotional suppression and intellectual overvaluation. It reveals a cultural projection that equates sensitivity with weakness, intuition with irrationality, and receptivity with passivity. The woman who is asked such a question is not only being misread, she is being measured against a standard that was never meant to include her in the first place. Over time, repeated exposure to these projections can fragment the self. A woman may begin to internalize the very distortions projected onto her. She may question her instincts, mute her emotional responses, or try to reshape herself into an image that invites less interrogation. She becomes both subject and object, constantly adjusting in the hope of being understood, yet consistently encountering questions that echo someone else's fears, not her truth. What drives her crazy is not just the misunderstanding, but the pressure to correct it, again and again, when the very premise of the question is flawed. A woman does not live solely as an individual. From the moment she begins to form an identity, she is met not just with the rawness of her own experience, but with an intricate network of cultural expectations, family ideals, and inherited myths about what it means to be female. These expectations are often so deeply embedded that they are mistaken for truth. They do not arrive as commands, but as questions, subtle, insistent, ever-present. Don't you want children someday? Why don't you smile more? Isn't it time you settled down? These are not inquiries, they are veiled directives. And herein lies the tension, between who she truly is and who she has been told she should be, between the soul's pull toward authenticity and the world's pull toward approval. She lives inside this polarity, not as a choice but as a psychic battleground. Each question becomes a test, conform or confront. To move toward authenticity often means facing the risk of rejection. The woman who chooses to follow her own rhythm, to say no when yes is expected, to prioritize solitude over companionship or ambition over nurturing, is made to feel deviant, not just socially, but morally. The questions she receives are rarely neutral. They carry a kind of moral gravity, an implication that the path of expectation is safer, more valuable, more feminine. And so to deviate is to feel guilt, even if only unconsciously. This is the silent pressure many women endure, the psychic weight of disappointing an invisible audience. The tension intensifies when expectations appear reasonable, even loving. A mother asks, "Don't you want a stable life?" A partner asks, "Why can't you just be happy with what we have?" A friend says, "You're so strong, I wish I could be like you," not realizing that this praise can become its own prison. These expectations are not necessarily malicious, but even benign projections become burdens when they are internalized. The woman is not only navigating her own becoming, she is managing the emotional comfort of those around her. Authenticity in its pure form is not loud. It is not rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It is quiet clarity, a knowing that arises from within. But when confronted constantly with questions that imply she is lacking, too emotional, too independent, too ambitious, too soft, she must decide whether to answer honestly or to give the answer that maintains harmony. And often harmony wins, because to tell the truth is to risk being called difficult, dramatic, selfish, or worse, unlovable. This is the deeper reason why certain questions feel like violations. They force her to choose between betraying herself or disrupting the illusion of agreement. And both come with cost. Over time, the accumulation of small betrayals can lead to a kind of psychic numbness. The woman forgets what she truly wants. She forgets the sound of her own voice beneath the noise of compliance. At a symbolic level, this dynamic echoes the myth of Persephone, torn between the surface world of expectation and the underworld of hidden truth. To remain above is to play the role assigned, the daughter, the wife, the light-bearer. To descend is to face the deeper self, unfiltered, unapproved, unafraid. But the descent is dangerous, because the world does not reward women for dwelling in their depths. It rewards them for smiling, for agreeing, for staying consistent even when their souls are evolving. And so, a question as simple as, "Why can't you just be content?" is not simple at all. Say, it is a boundary, a reminder, a psychic gate that says, stay within what we understand of you, stay within what makes us comfortable, stay within the mask. And if she dares to remove it, to answer from her own authority, she risks being seen as ungrateful, unstable, or unfeminine. Yet every time she chooses authenticity over expectation, She edges closer to herself and further from the scripts that never truly belonged to her. Not all silence is empty. Sometimes it is loaded with absence, an absence that echoes louder than words. Within the inner life of a woman, it is often not the obvious questions that unsettle her most, but the ones that are never asked. The ones that are avoided, feared, or ignored. The questions that would invite her into depth, complexity, and contradiction, but instead are left hanging in the unspoken space between her and the world. What drives her crazy is not just what people ask, but what they refuse to ask, because when the world asks her, "Why are you upset?" but never, "What are you carrying that no one sees?" Something within her is missed. When people ask, "Are you okay now?" but never, "What part of you have you had to hide just to feel safe today?" And she begins to feel like a surface being viewed, not a soul being met. The unasked question is not just a missed opportunity, it is a kind of psychological erasure. So much of a woman's experience remains invisible. Not because she chooses to hide it, but because she is rarely invited to reveal it. She senses what the room can tolerate. She knows which feelings are too much, which truths are too raw, which insights are too threatening. And so she edits herself. She senses her grief, softens her fire, dilutes her joy, because no one has dared to ask the questions that would allow her to show up fully. There is a sacred violence in being constantly seen through shallow inquiry. To be asked endlessly about appearance, relationship status, career milestones, or children, but rarely about longing, spiritual hunger, shadow, or inner knowing, creates a dissonance in her psyche. She feels split. The outer woman plays the game, answers politely, nods on cue. But the inner woman, the one who is wild and knowing, begins to retreat. Not out of fear, but out of futility. When questions are too small for the soul they are addressing, they begin to feel like cages. A woman is not only responding to what is asked, she is also responding to what is not. She notices the absence of curiosity about her dreams, the lack of wonder about her inner world, the silence around her truth. She notices the way people look away when she weeps too freely or speaks too passionately. And she learns, here in this space my depth is unwelcome. There is profound power in the right question, questions that don't interrogate but invite. A woman longs for questions that open doors within her, not ones that push her into corners. Questions like, what truth have you never spoken aloud? Or what do you need that you've taught yourself not to need? These are not easy questions. They demand presence, patience, reverence. But they are the ones that touch the root of her experience. The absence of these questions creates a quiet ache. It is the ache of not being fully known. Not because she hides, but because no one has created the conditions for revelation. She may laugh at the right times, succeed by all outer measures, appear composed and content. Yet underneath, she may be starving for someone to ask her what she's been silencing for years. Not to fix her, not to advise her, but simply to witness her in the fullness of her truth. The feminine psyche is relational by nature. It reveals itself in response to presence, not pressure. The right question is not an interrogation, it is an invocation. It calls forth what is buried. It signals safety, depth, curiosity, and in its absence, a woman learns to speak only half her language, live only half her life, express only half her knowing. She does not silence herself because she has nothing to say. She silences herself because no one has asked her to speak from the place where her soul actually resides. There comes a moment, often quietly, when a woman no longer waits for permission to speak. Not from men, not from culture, not even from the more obedient parts of herself. It is not an act of rebellion, it is an act of remembrance. She is not discovering her voice. She is reclaiming what was always hers, buried beneath years of conditioning, compliance, and carefully curated politeness. The feminine voice is not just vocal expression. It is not limited to speech or volume or articulation. It is a psychic frequency, a deep intuitive rhythm that moves through her body, her choices, her silence, her presence. To reclaim this voice is to re-inhabit the forgotten rooms of her own soul, the ones she locked when the questions began to shape her rather than seek her. From a young age, many women are taught to speak in ways that preserve comfort, to shrink their words into what is palatable, to offer truths only after softening them into something non-threatening. Praise is given for being easy to talk to, level-headed, supportive, and sweet. These roles are not inherently false, But when they become requirements for belonging, something essential is lost. The voice that might speak from the belly, from the rage, from the wild knowing, it is slowly exiled. Not erased, but silenced beneath layers of social survival, and so she adapts. She learns to speak around her truth rather than from it. She answers questions with what others want to hear. She becomes fluent in making others feel safe, even at the cost of her own clarity. But over time, this creates a fracture in the psyche. A split between the voice she uses to be accepted and the voice that remains in the underworld, untouched, uninvited. Reclaiming the voice of the feminine is not about being louder. It is about becoming truer. It requires a descent into the places where her voice was first taken, not always through violence, but through subtle dismissals, patronizing corrections, or the slow, steady erosion of her inner authority. Perhaps she was told she was too sensitive, too dramatic, too opinionated, or too much. These phrases are not just criticisms, they are psychic spells, designed to domesticate the wildness of her voice until it is tame enough to be tolerated. But the voice does not die. It waits. It waits in the body, in the dreams, in the journals written late at night. It waits in the tension between what she says and what she longs to say. It waits in the lump in her throat when she nods yes but wants to scream no. And when she finally begins to listen, not to the noise around her but to the pulse within, something ancient stirs. To reclaim the feminine voice is to remember that expression is not always explanation. Her voice may arrive in poetry, in laughter, in silence, in song, in movement, in refusal. It may be nonlinear, inconvenient, unsettling. It may speak of beauty and blood in the same breath. Because the feminine voice, once awakened, does not seek to be pleasing. It seeks to be whole. There is a wisdom that returns when she speaks from the place that was once shamed. There is clarity in her tone when she is no longer apologizing for her existence. Her voice is no longer shaped by the desire to be understood, but by the urgency to be real. It is not reactive. It is not theatrical. It is elemental. It comes from the same place that births intuition, boundary, insight, and creation. It is the voice that sings before words are formed, that prays without language, that sees without explanation.